When we think of horror on screen, the big-budget American juggernauts often spring to mind. But British television has long been a quiet pioneer in the art of fear. With modest budgets, a love for atmosphere, and a deep respect for psychological terror, UK horror TV has often set the benchmark for the genre, influencing shows and films far beyond its borders. In this countdown, we'll look at the scariest, most impactful, and sometimes most bizarre British horror TV shows ever broadcast. These weren't just frightening. They shifted culture, inspired generations, and sometimes even caused a bit of panic.
The scariest British horror TV shows ever made.
Children of the Stones, 1977. A terrifying children's series on ITV, Children of the Stones told the story of a scientist and his son who moved to a strange village encircled by standing stones. The eerie villagers chant in unison, time loops appear, and the music, that unsettling, droning choir, is burned into the memory of anyone who watched it. Despite being aimed at kids, it was written by serious dramatists Jeremy Burnham and Trevor Ray, and remains one of the most sophisticated pieces of children's horror ever made. It even inspired episodes of Doctor Who, and was once described by the great Stephen King as real nightmare fuel. Ghostwatch, 1992, the most infamous of them all. Broadcast on Halloween night, Ghostwatch was presented as a live investigation of a haunted house, featuring respected BBC figures like Sarah Green, Mike Smith, Craig Charles and Michael Parkinson. What viewers didn't know, or refused to believe, was that the whole thing was scripted. The malevolent spirit, Pipes, who appears briefly in Blink and You'll Miss It shots, became a symbol of TV horror at its most effective. Written by Stephen Volk, directed by Leslie Manning, Ghostwatch triggered a national panic, flooded the BBC with complaints, and was blamed for PTSD symptoms in some viewers. It was banned from rebroadcast for over a decade, and still, it paved the way for the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity, and countless found footage horror efforts that followed. To this day, no British broadcast has created quite the same level of chaos and fear. Inside Number 9, 2014, to Who Knows. Created by Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, alumni of the League of Gentlemen, Inside Number 9 is a masterclass in short-form storytelling, and several episodes veer directly into horror. The Devil of Christmas, a faux 1970s horror pastiche, is particularly grim, while Deadline, a live Halloween special, stunned viewers with its technical audacity and psychological twists. On a side note, every episode contains a hidden silver hair, a small in-joke for devoted fans to spot. This series has been praised for its unpredictability, with some stories starting as comedies before turning into nightmares in the final moments. The League of Gentlemen, 1999 to 2002, and again in 2017. A grotesque blend of comedy and horror, The League of Gentlemen introduced viewers to the nightmarish town of Royston Vasey, where local shops were for local people, and Papa Lazarou lurked in the shadows. Created by Mark Gatiss, Reece Shearsmith, Steve Pemberton and Jeremy Dyson, the series blurred the line between sketch comedy and full-blown psychological horror. This show's twisted tone was years ahead of its time, influencing later shows like Psychoville and Inside Number 9, which contained the same writers and cast some of the time. The creators even claimed the village itself was partly based on real northern market towns, just turned up to 11. Quatermass Experiment, 1953. This was a live broadcast that laid the groundwork for British sci-fi horror, a BBC serial which followed Professor Bernard Quatermass as he investigated an astronaut's horrific transformation after returning from space. It combined Cold War paranoia with creeping body horror, written by Nigel Neal and directed by Rudolph Cartier. It proved prophetic. Long before The X-Files or Stranger Things, he was blending science fiction and dread with social commentary. The production was so ambitious that during the live broadcast, one actor forgot his lines and had to be carried off. But it didn't matter, the public was hooked, and Quatermass would return in multiple sequels and film versions, becoming a cornerstone of British genre storytelling. The Stone Tape, 1972. Another Nigel Neal classic. The Stone Tape explores the idea that buildings can record emotional energy, in this case, a screaming ghost. The ghost was encoded in the stone walls of a Victorian mansion. Jane Asher stars as a scientist who becomes the victim of the very phenomenon she's trying to understand. This BBC Christmas ghost story inspired countless riffs on the idea of residual hauntings, from Doctor Who to Poltergeist to Archive 81. And it worked so well because Neil hated most ghost stories that lean too hard on superstition. His goal with the Stone Tape was to give the supernatural a scientific basis, and it worked. Threads, 1984. Arguably the most traumatizing TV drama ever aired, Threads depicted a nuclear attack on Sheffield and its horrific aftermath. Written by Barry Hines and directed by Mick Jackson, it was grounded in research from government and military sources, which made the horror all the more believable. The scenes of society slowly collapsing, starvation, and radiation sickness are still difficult to watch today. Viewers were so disturbed on its first showing, the BBC was flooded with complaints. It's now shown in some classrooms as an educational warning, and US officials reportedly used it as a training resource during the Cold War. Whistle and I'll Come to You, 1968. Adapted from the M.R. James short story, this BBC production starred Michael Hordern as a skeptical academic who finds a whistle in a graveyard and accidentally summons a supernatural presence. Directed by Jonathan Miller, it is a masterclass in understatement. Most of the terror comes from long silences, odd camera angles, and Hordern's increasingly unhinged muttering. The ghost itself was portrayed by a sheet on a wire, that's all. Yet the scene of it walking towards Hordern on the beach is still considered one of the scariest in British TV history. Woman in Black, 1989. This chilling ITV adaptation of Susan Hill's ghost story is often described as one of the most terrifying dramas ever shown on British TV. Directed by Herbert Wise and adapted by Nigel Neal, the legendary writer behind Quatermass, the film uses minimal effects and sound to create maximum dread. Pauline Moran's portrayal of the ghostly woman in black is so disturbing that even brief glimpses of her sent viewers recoiling. The original broadcast caused such a stir that the film wasn't shown again on TV for over a decade. It eventually spawned a hugely successful West End stage play and, of course, a 2012 film version starring Daniel Radcliffe. British horror TV has never needed grand budgets or flashy effects to unsettle its viewers. With ingenuity, atmosphere, and strong writing, these shows carved out new territory in the horror genre. Often quietly, sometimes controversially, but always memorably. From psychological disintegration and ghostly whispers to nuclear apocalypse and cursed artifacts, these stories reflect Britain's rich, weird, and wonderfully dark imagination. They're proof that the scariest things don't always go bump in the night. Sometimes they whisper through your TV. Join me at Curious Tales and Tours for more. Please subscribe below.